Katie Joy Duke, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure to be here.
Awesome. I have been looking forward to having you on for months. So you and I are in the book creator program together, and
Yes.
we both have books coming out in May.
Yay.
Yes. Okay. So can you tell folks, first let's start with who you are and what keeps you busy in this great, big, beautiful world.
Absolutely. So my name is Katie Joy Duke. I am an author, a memoirist, a life coach, a mom, a yogi, a daughter, a wife, so many beautiful things. And what keeps me busy these days? So first and foremost, my daughter, Moxie, keeps me very busy. Moxie is she's about 4.5 now, and she is my rainbow baby. And we can talk a little bit more about that later in the podcast, but she is just an incredibly vibrant, smart, intuitive, kind, curious, silly 4-year-old. And I love being her mother. Other things that keep me busy lately have been writing my book, building out my business. I'm rebranding my coaching business, which is very exciting. So many amazing things.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
Well, okay. I've been thinking about this and wondering where, because I know your story, but I've been thinking about where should we start with your story? And I'm wondering, where do you want listeners to begin today?
Well, I guess I will say that the inspiration for writing my book. So I think that's a great spot to start, because I'm 41, and not every 41-year-old has spent 6 years working on a memoir. So, we all have big things that happen in our lives, but there aren't, not very many people sit down and actually write it out. Right. So that's what I've done. The inspiration for my story was the death of my firstborn daughter, Poppy. She was stillborn at full term in October of 2015. And my husband and I were very excited to be her parents and to become a family. And we were devastated when we found out that she no longer had a heartbeat. So I started, thank you. Yeah. And I will say, just from the outset, it has been a little over 6 years, and I have talked about my loss 1,000 times over. And because I have talked about it, and because I've done so much healing work, I usually can talk about these things without crying. But for the first couple of years, it was very, very hard. And this conversation would have been very different had we been talking about this, a few months in.
I know. And you and I have just met in the last 11 months.
Yeah.
And, so your story, to me, while I know it, it's still, every time I hear it, the energy of it and the truth of your words, they touch my heart every time I hear it. And it's another reason I was so excited to share you with the folks at Yoke in Abundance. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I started writing my memoir. I really did the night that we got home from the hospital. It wasn't a book at that point, of course, and I had no idea where it was going, but I was journaling about my feelings and my loss. And it was a very sweet little journal that my mother had sent me in a care package. It was like little 4x4. I actually have it at my fingertips. Well, anyways, doesn't matter. But this little tiny journal, and I'd woken up from a very powerful dream and wanted to capture those thoughts. And that's where the story starts.
So can you tell us a little bit about what happened?
Yeah, absolutely. So just to kind of take a step back from that devastating discovery in the hospital that Poppy was gone. My husband and I had the February before Poppy was born, my husband asked me to marry him on a very romantic vacation in Kauai, one of the tiniest islands in Hawaii, an incredible place for anyone who ever is listening. Definitely take a chance on Kauai if you get to visit the islands. And it was an incredible, saying yes to him, being so excited to be his fiance. And we had an unexpected surprise, which was finding out the very next day that we were pregnant with our daughter.
And so Katie, I've had the privilege of reading your book.
Yeah.
Reading an advanced copy of this book. And part of me, because I loved your book so much, and because I think that the way you write, you just have these unexpected stories in every chapter that I don't want to give away. Part of me is like,
I know.
How do I tell the listeners about this without giving away how special this is?
Yeah. No, it's true. It is. Well, and I think that was actually one of the reasons why, when she did die, I knew that the story would be about my grief. I knew that I wanted to share with the world the loss and the devastation, and all the feelings that come with going through one of life's hardest tragedies. And I also knew that there was this incredible love story to tell. So I knew that. Two love stories. I mean, it's really a love story. It's interesting because it's a grief story. It's a story of loss, but it is a story of love as well. And a love that continues. I mean, my husband and I are actually just coming up on our 7th wedding anniversary. We got married April 25th, and we're excited. We're kind of trying to figure out what we're going to do. But we also want to play off of the idea of the 7-year itch. And I'm thinking of doing some sort of like silly, like covering ourselves in like red chicken pox dots or something, and like scratching ourselves or something, just making a joke of it.
Lotion.
Yes, exactly. Like we want to make a joke of it because we have survived. I mean, and we celebrated our first wedding anniversary, and we were 6 months into our grief process. So it was not what a young newlywed couple ever imagines they would go through. And we have made it. And I love Eli very much. And it's been very hard. That's one thing I will never candy coat, the challenges that he and I have had, and the challenges that our loss brought to us as a couple, and also in many ways have brought us together. Our bond, having gone through that experience, and survived it, and have gotten this far, and now have, another daughter who is incredible. And we keep reinventing ourselves. So he's been very supportive.
Well, Katie, it's interesting. I think I've mentioned this to you. My very closest friend from high school had actually the same thing happen to her. And so Chelsea got married much earlier than I did. So she got married right out of college, and all she ever wanted to be was a mom. That was like the story she wanted for herself. And she got pregnant with Wiley, had a phenomenal pregnancy until the very end. Right. And the exact same situation. And I won't share, I'll let you share your story. But what I think is so important about you telling your story, I think you telling your story is very important, but we as women don't hear these stories often. So when it happens, it comes as such an additional shock, I feel like. And so I wish that your book had been available, that I could have sent her then. And say, you're not alone. I don't know what you're going through, but you're not alone.
Yes. That's exactly what happened to me. A girlfriend of mine, my best friend from law school, Althea, sent me a copy of a memoir written by another author who had gone through the same type of loss. Of course, her circumstances were very different, as they all are, but that reading that book, I read that book within the first 2 weeks of coming home from the hospital. And it, one, showed me that I wasn't alone. Two, validated all the crazy feelings that I was already having. And three, inspired me to write mine and know that my story was worth telling. And to Chelsea, your friend, and what was her baby's name?
Wiley.
And Wiley. You know, I think that my book will, I'd still love you to give Chelsea a copy of my book, you know, and for anyone that, I think what's so exciting for me about this book is it's going to be, I believe, a powerful story for anyone that's in an acute situation where they're just grieving, where they've just lost their child. And also, I know that it's going to be a beautiful story for all those women who are in their 50s, their 60s, their 70s, that they had stillborn children, that they lost a child and they didn't get to talk about it. It wasn't okay to talk about it. It wasn't socially acceptable. It wasn't encouraged. Those babies were taken out of their arms. They never got to hold them. They didn't get any pictures with them. You know, I mean, that was devastating. And that's really one of the things that I, you know, as I sort of discover what platform I like, using my voice as an advocate for stillbirth awareness and speaking about these things and acknowledging, normalizing this whole experience that over 24,000 families experience every year in the United States. Like that's the number of babies that are stillborn in the US every single year. Which means that another 48,000 parents are going through this, which means that today mommies and daddies are discovering that their children are no longer alive. But that it's going to be a book that allows people to go into those tender places inside their heart that are still unhealed and need to be nurtured and need to be remembered. So I'm very excited for what this book is going to mean for those people as well.
Yeah. Yeah. The themes of grief in your book play out not just in what happened with your daughter, but also in other ways. Can you share a story with us about how grief shows up in the book?
Yeah. Let's see. Well, I think one of the things that is really relevant when it comes to grief is we have the initial loss. So in my case, the initial loss was Poppy dying. And then the way that it's phrased in sort of the grief community is the secondary losses. So everything that a person loses in addition to the sort of the fallout, I guess that's kind of like the easiest way to say it. And, you know, one of the ways that grief shows up in my book is with my profession. I was a lawyer when Poppy died. I had been practicing law for almost 9 years at that point, and I was a Social Security disability advocate. So I would go with my clients to their hearings and appear in front of an administrative law judge and argue their case. And I was really good at it. And I really cared about my clients. I was definitely, I would say I fell on the spectrum of compassionate lawyers, you know, lawyers that really cared and really had what it took to be with people in their difficult times. When I tried returning to work after Poppy died and doing the same type of work, it was a whole nother world for me, because whereas I had sort of these protective shields up, these healthy boundaries, these barriers where I could read and explore and ask questions about someone's trauma, I was removed from it. But afterwards, every single case felt re-traumatizing to me because I was in it. Like I was also traumatized. I had not had time to process my loss. And I think in some ways, it, like being with my clients, woke up all sorts of the secondary losses. So I would say one of the ways that grief shows up in my story is ultimately deciding to leave my job as a lawyer, and that being a loss. It was I write about this, but it was one of those things where, like, when I resigned from my job, I felt both empowered and disenfranchised. I knew that I was making the decision to save my own life, but I also was really angry about it. I was really upset that I felt like my child had been ripped out of my arms, and then my career had been taken from me too, because I couldn't function anymore. So, I mean, that was a form of grief. There are so many. I mean, grief definitely is a thread. 3 years ago, I just actually celebrated the, well, I guess celebrate, I don't know if that's the right word, but memorialized the passing of my father. He died 3 years ago. February 27th was his date of death. And actually, I think it was either March 2nd or March 3rd. So it would have been today. It's funny that I love synchronicities of dates, but that we celebrated a memorial. We had a memorial for him. And his passing was sort of well, I've ended my memoir ends with my experience of losing my father. And it was my dad became my number one fan, my biggest supporter, my greatest advocate after Poppy died. He and I had an incredible relationship beforehand, but it deepened and it transformed in ways that I was so grateful for. Like he was there for me in ways that when I felt like when I didn't know who else to trust or talk to, like I knew that my dad was there for me. And when he died, it was very interesting because Poppy's death was unexpected. It was traumatic. We had no idea. We couldn't anticipate it. These are, and as I integrate into this, like the grief community at large, there's also something called like anticipatory grief, which that's another phrase, sort of, we got the secondary losses, anticipatory grief. I'm learning these things, but so with my father, there was this anticipatory grief where I knew that he was dying. He was in hospice. I knew he was not going to live. And because of that, and because of what I had learned from Poppy, who really became a spirit guide and became a guiding force in my life to teach me lessons, I was able to have really amazing conversations with my dad before he passed away. And I feel so lucky for having had the courage to have those conversations and to essentially to confront him with the truth of his mortality, right? Because we all know most of us walk around in total denial about all sorts of things, right? And I wasn't in denial about what was happening with my dad. And so we could actually grieve together. We grieved together before he died. And that's something that I just want to encourage people to do when they know, like, to have those conversations, to remember before the death, before the
That's
loss.
so powerful, being able to have those conversations. You just mentioned it, that Poppy became very much like a spirit guide for you. And I really believe that those that pass still talk to us.
Oh yeah.
And that it's absolutely still possible for us to have a relationship with them. And one of my favorite things about your book is how alive your relationship with Poppy is. And I'm wondering if you can talk about, was that something that you were open to before? Is it a relationship that changed the way you thought about things? Just anything you want to share around that?
Sure. Yeah. It's definitely something that developed after she died. I would say with hands down, before Poppy died, it's so interesting. I've talked about this a lot, and I've written about this to myself, a lot of the journaling, those pages that no one ever sees. Yes. They're important. Nobody needs to see that stuff. I died the day Poppy died. Like the woman that existed before Poppy's death died. There was a very real line in the sand. And for months and months and months. And probably I would say for really the first year after she died, it was, I mean, I counted the days. I mean, as a new mommy does. I mean, that's like the irony of the whole thing is that, you know, you're out and about, you've got a brand new baby, everyone's, oh, how old is she? And you're like, oh, 17 days, like, it's just like 2.5 weeks, you're counting every moment. I counted every moment too, but I was counting the days I didn't have her. No, I felt like I was 4 days old, like I was 8 days old, like I was 17 weeks old. I was a new quote unquote person, but I was completely undefined. I was unraveling, like everything that I thought was certain and knowable and guaranteed was uncertain and unknowable and not guaranteed. Like everything was right. And so all of like the spiritual truths, right? Everything that I had sort of dabbled in before Poppy died in terms of being a yogi and reading incredible literature. I mean, from Buddhist philosophy to gosh, I mean, now my mind is going to totally blank, but things like even like the Prophet, like the Prophet by Khalil Gibran and Rumi and, all incredible, and some of the Bible, some of Jesus's teachings, some of Buddha's teachings, the Dalai Lama, I mean, it goes on and on. Thich Nhat Hanh, I hope I said his name right. And I know he just recently passed, but so many incredible teachers. All of these things started to make more sense after I'd gone through my loss. And I have to give major kudos to my friends who had the courage to plant seeds for me in this knowing, like helped me. I've looked back at things like my friend Alisha sent me a series of love letters after Poppy died. They were so amazing. They just kept coming in the mail. And I mentioned these in my memoir, but like, she talked to me about my grief, but she talked to me about like her kid crapping in her pants. Like she talked about all these things that just like real life stuff, right? Just was with me. But things that she also did was, we've talked about this, you and I, but she like gave me permission to believe whatever I needed to believe. And I needed that in those moments. I needed someone to say, it's okay for you to believe things differently now. It's okay for you to live life differently if you want to. It's okay to, whatever is going to get you through, go for it. And another friend of mine, her name is Joy. Joy was the one who suggested to me that Poppy's purpose was fulfilled in the time that she was in my womb, that what Poppy needed. So some people believe that we make a contract that our souls contract before an incarnation. And I do believe, I had always, as a kid and growing up, like there was sort of like a deeper knowing or a curiosity in me about where I got sort of the qualities of my essence, like why I showed up the way I did in the world. Like, where does this come from? Like, where, I like, even I remember being 14, 15, 16 years old and in those quiet moments with myself going like, is this really just from this life? Like, am I having these feelings? And I always felt like I was carrying some wisdom from before, right? Like that something was coming with me that I came into the world with. And so after Poppy died and people started, like my friend Joy in particular, suggested to me, Katie, and I just commend her for her courage, because it takes a lot of chutzpah to like say these things to a person and to say it in a way that's like loving and not like, I don't know. I mean, I think your listeners will understand that. I think you do too, but I commend her for her courage. She suggested that Poppy had a purpose and that in the time that she was here, she fulfilled it. And that was like, whoa, it took me, I sat with that. And then I had my own experiences with sort of coming to believe that that was in fact the case, like for Poppy's in her own life, right? Because if we all have a soul, then Poppy has one, obviously. And she got what she needed. And that I got to be her mommy, that I got to be the one. Yeah. What a blessing and that her life, that she chose me, that I got to nurture her life while she was with me. And then I'm keeping her spirit alive. And so, and I write this in her book, but I really believe that she's the essence of love. Like, I mean, she never wanted for anything. She never, she never cried. She never felt any pain. All she knew was love. And all I knew was the love that I loved of her. And so, yes, to answer your question, like I have definitely developed my spiritual life has definitely deepened and grown and developed because of Poppy and how she continues to show up for me and people that know of her, and now through this book.
Yeah, I really want to talk to you more about the way Poppy shows up. And I want listeners to go.
Okay.
I want to read your book.
Yeah.
And I want to have you back on for a part 2, because I think that the way Poppy has showed up in your life, even after she left this earth, and the way she continues to show up, I think it's really profound. And her story has taught me a lot, and I feel like listeners can benefit from that. And I'm so glad I don't have any meetings after this podcast episode, because I'm having a hard time getting through it without like bursting into major tears here. So, well, we have to do a part 2 of this, but there's a piece of your story that I wanted to really make sure we talked about, not because it's easy, but because I know women who have had miscarriages. I know women who have had children that were stillborn. And you talk in your book about the question, and I'm not going to get through this. Sorry, I'm trying about the question about, am I a mother? Can you talk to us about those feelings and how you were able to work through that when it happened?
Yeah. Gosh, it really, that's such an amazing, it's an important question, especially for all of the women who have experienced loss. Yeah. And in particular, before there is another pregnancy, or I have been so fortunate and so blessed to have my daughter Moxie, and she knows how incredibly fortunate she is, and we are, and we're such a happy family. But I mean, just yesterday I spoke with a mom who her daughter Madeline would be 12, and she did not have any children after Madeline, even though she tried. And so, and she is a mother.
Yeah.
She is a mother. She is Madeline's mother, and she will always be Madeline's mother, and Madeline will always be her daughter. Right.
Yeah.
And so I definitely struggled with whether I was a mother. And I think what's really interesting to consider here is that I will confess, I like to call myself a recovering perfectionist, but I am definitely like, perfectionism it's part of my survival mechanism. It's part of how I have made it this far in my life. And it serves me, and it also holds me back. Right. So, but one of the interesting things that Brene Brown says about perfectionism is that there's this constant need for external validation. It's like that the world, it's complicated, right? But I mean, because I am my worst critic, but also like perfectionism has a lot to do with sort of being seen as a certain way, right? And an interesting thing I think about that too is that like the question is, well, no matter how much the world loves you or praises you, are you ever going to be enough? So that's sort of like, that could be another podcast.
Another podcast.
Whole other podcast. It has nothing to, that's the life coaching side of things. But what I will say is that connecting that to the question of motherhood, what was so hard was being in the world again and not having my child, not having nothing. I mean, growing a human takes a lot of energy. You know, I mean, any woman who's ever gone through pregnancy, mothers out there, we know, like it is exhausting, no matter how golden it is, and which mine was, both of mine were really good pregnancies. Like it is exhausting. So here I am, like trying to be in the world again, trying to show up. And the question is like, okay, well, who am I? Like, am I a mother? Right? Am I? And what I will say that I had to do, and this isn't in my book, but definitely in my own sort of coming to terms through my own journaling, was all of the energy that I had anticipated pouring into my daughter, I had to flip back on myself. I had to start mothering myself. I had to learn how to parent myself, because as much as my mom and dad showed up for me and sometimes didn't, especially my mom. I love you, Mom, but come on, let's be real. She'll agree and she'll listen to this and she'll understand. I mean, there were moments when like, but you know, as much as like I wanted my mommy, right? I needed my mommy to be there, right? She couldn't be. I had to become my own mother. I had to source my own inner strength and my own energy and my own faith and my own and I got a lot of help in my acknowledgements. I'm like, to all my healers, to all of those people that like poked me with needles and you know, and I mean, all of it, like, to, you know, thank you. Cause I could not have gotten through this on my own. Absolutely could not have gotten through this alone. So you know, it's one thing I would say, ask for help, that's one of the things I learned how to do. Poppy taught me how to ask for help. I am not, yeah, I tell you what, one of my biggest lessons, I know how to ask for help. I know how to admit when I can't do it alone, and I don't try to do it alone anymore. I don't, you know, like no biggie. Like I need your help. I'm calling in that card. Like, you know, for anyone who's listening, if you're in a state of need and you have that friend who said, let me know if there's something I can do, call them up. Like actually cash in on that tab. I kept a list of people after Poppy died who said, you know, I don't know what to do right now, but just let me know if there's anything ever. I actually wrote those people's names down. And when the time came up, I could look at that list and go, that person actually could help me with this. Because I know people want to help. People want to help, but they don't know what to do. And again, that's a whole nother podcast. but yeah, so mothering, I was a mother even before. I mean, I would say this, it's interesting because I think you become well, it's so complicated. But depending on what your expectations are, and if you're wanting the pregnancy, like, you know, you become a mother the moment you find out you're pregnant. Everything changes, right? And so I had been a mother to Poppy the whole time, and I continue. It's interesting. We have a different sort of relationship right now. Like she doesn't need a mother. Poppy doesn't need me to mother her anymore. She's way beyond that. Our relationship is, you know, much more cosmic and high level at this point. But when I look back at those pictures of her, which I don't do very often, because there are only a few things that get me crying anymore about this, you know, hearing of new losses and being with new mommies who have lost definitely gets me emotional because I know how painful it is for them and I'm crying for them. But when I look at Poppy's pictures, wow, like when I do remember that she was and is a baby, right? You know, because that's just sad. Yeah. But yeah, so mothering. We are mothers. And I do think it's a choice. I think you also get to identify, right? You get to identify however you want. If you want to say I'm a mother or not, whatever serves your heart. And all loss is relevant, and no matter, one of the interesting things I've learned about recently, there's some research out there around grief and child loss, and the amount of time is actually irrelevant. So in terms of how long you've been pregnant, what's relevant is your level of expectation.
Whoa.
Yes.
Okay. Can you unpack that for us a little?
Yeah. And I'm going to learn more about this because it's fascinating. But so let's say you have been trying to get pregnant for 2 years, right? And finally, oh my goodness, whether it's naturally or, through fertility treatments or whatever, right? Finally, you pee on that stick and it's like, oh, I'm pregnant. And you just have this overwhelming sense of like, oh my God, finally, like there's a life inside of me. I'm going to be a mother. It's going to happen, right? Like, let's say that pregnancy, then for whatever reason, you're 4 weeks in, and for 4 weeks you've been dreaming and you're excited and we've already ordered 17 onesies on Instagram, or not Instagram, or whatever, Amazon, you know what I mean?
Etsy.
Let's, yeah. Etsy. And then you find out that the pregnancy is no longer, that your baby is no longer viable, right? The grief that person can experience is just as much the experience of grief, the feelings, the emotions, the agony, all of that, the desperation, all of that can be exactly the same as someone who's giving birth in the hospital and loses a child. So that's what's so fascinating. So that's what the research is showing. So what I think that, because I do love science, yay for science and researchers and like data, right? Like data is so important. The emotions and the feelings, all this, like kind of then putting all those things together and saying, wow, so this is one of the reasons why it's so important to, one, be able to talk about and acknowledge all loss, and to validate the experience of grief for those people who are going through it. I think especially for those women who are losing pregnancies early, because 1 in 4 pregnancies end in miscarriage. 1 in 4, 25% of pregnancies end in miscarriage. That's huge.
Which means there's a lot of pregnancies that we're not talking about.
No. And that's what's so interesting. So I did the same thing. Now, not to ruin any surprises with the book, but we chose not to talk about our pregnancy because we wanted to get married and we didn't want our wedding to be about the baby and this sort of thing. But when you think about the cultural practice of waiting until the end of your first trimester to tell people that you're pregnant, I understand people's wanting to be private and yada, yada, that's perfectly fine. But this whole idea of like, okay, now we're going to announce it. Now it's safe, quote unquote. Now we can tell people that we're pregnant. What happens is it leaves that massive number of women and fathers who have experienced a miscarriage. And sometimes I would say probably women get pregnant, have a miscarriage, and never even tell their husbands because they just don't even want to deal. So they're carrying that around. I mean, there's so many different scenarios, but we have all these people who never told anyone they were pregnant, got attached to this idea of being pregnant, then lost the pregnancy. And now they're like, wait a second, now I just tell people, but no one,
but
you're like,
got excited with you. Nobody got,
yeah, exactly. Right. So then you're just like alone in your grief and you're like, I don't even know who to talk to because I never told anyone I was pregnant. So I do think, although you don't need to be blasting that you're pregnant, like you don't need to be taking pictures of pee sticks and putting them on Facebook or anything like that. I do think telling a trusted small number of people at the beginning of a pregnancy is something that is really important so that you do, if there is a loss, because the risk is so high. I mean, let's be real, people, it's 25%, like that's big. To be able to have that community and that support. And also to know for women who do go through that there are support groups. I mean, when we went to support groups after Poppy died, there were lots of people that were there who had miscarriages. And I will say from being in the room with them that, now thinking about this research, that their experience of grief was as intense as ours. And they also apologize, like, oh, I know that your experience, I know that your loss was worse than mine. And it's like, no, 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 no. We have to get rid of that, right? People feel like they have to apologize because like, oh, you had a baby and I just had a miscarriage. And it's like, like, come on. If the research shows that your experience of grief is the same, then there's no need to compare. Like, comparison is the killer of joy. And in those cases, there is no joy anyway. So it's the triple comparison, triple killer.
Well, I think it's no coincidence. We didn't plan it this way, but we're recording on Ash Wednesday. And I feel like there's something, I don't know, I just feel like I don't know what, but I feel like there's something significant about that.
Yeah.
To me, it's such a period of entering into, I was raised very Catholic. That's not my faith. And still, so, 18 years of very strict Catholicism, like there's this piece of me that the ritual and the acknowledgement when you're entering into Lent, you're entering into a time of contemplation, right? And so I love the symbology, like the symbolism of us having this conversation during such a beautiful time of contemplation and thoughtfulness. It's poignant to me. So I really want everyone, this book is for everyone. It's really for anyone who has experienced loss of a pregnancy, but also loss of any type. And anyone that loves a good memoir, this is a phenomenal memoir. And I'm like so excited for it to be in folks' hands.
Me too.
I can't wait to see what your book cover is going to look like and what's next. But what else would you like to share with everyone?
Well, thank you so much for your incredibly kind words. I will say I have really stepped into my identity as a writer. I'm a writer. Like, there it is.
You are.
I am a writer.
You're a good writer.
And it's so exciting. I feel I'm so grateful to be so excited to share such a touching story with the world because it's taken me as long as it has taken me, which is perfectly fine. Timing is fine. I am very excited about the perspective that I can bring to the book. And even what's exciting is I'm planning a blog post about the inspiration for the title of my book. So the title of my book, which I don't know if we've said yet, is Still Breathing: My Journey with Love, Loss, and Reinvention. And the book went through I had several different titles over the course of 6 years. And I'm really excited to share in this blog post where the inspiration for Still Breathing came from. And I know, as you were one of my beta readers, Alisha, you had commented, you're like, gosh, I love how you carry this theme of breath throughout the entire book. Mm-hmm. So I guess
my favorite thing about the book, by the way.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Aww. I did too. And what was so neat was that it all came together in this sort of very just inspired, cosmic, again, this like, whoa, signs, inspiration, messages, getting all these oh gosh, wow, okay. And then actually, as I continued to work on the manuscript, seeing how breath, my breath, Poppy's breath, our collective breath, the universe is, all of it, how that thread worked through to the end. And here we are, all still breathing, right? We're, no matter what, I mean, day by day, moment by moment, breath by breath, here we are. I guess that's what I would say. That's what I would leave the audience with is, if you can remember one thing, is your breath. One thing is your breath. You've got it. It's there for you. It's going to keep you going.
Well, the last question I have for you is, how do you live a life of abundance?
Oh, how do I live a life of abundance? Oh gosh. Um, Gratitude, being, certainly, this trend of like good vibes only. I'm like, no. I'm not into the good.
I hate that expression.
I do too. I'm like, excuse me, are you not a human? Like, are you a robot? So the way that I live a life of abundance is the abundance of feelings and emotions and experiences, and allowing all of it, being with all of it, feeling the joy, feeling the sorrow, feeling the exhaustion, feeling the exhilaration, feeling my feelings, talking about things, celebrating the tiny stuff, like celebrating those little moments. Right now the crocuses are blooming in my neighborhood. We live north of Seattle, and the little baby daffodils are starting to come out, and some of the bunnies are starting to hop through the neighborhood, and all of the little red-breasted robins are just like, they're so excited, like all of these little things. These are the things, like when the crystal catches a ray of sunlight and rainbows shoot across the room, like just being with those simple moments, celebrating a hot shower, the things that just we're so fortunate. And also remembering that abundance is a state of mind as well, even because I have definitely been stuck in lack. What's the opposite of abundance, right? Like a scarcity, right? And so just counting my blessings, and also allowing the normalcy of everyday ups and downs to be there.
Well, Katie Joy Duke, I am so grateful to get to talk to you today. And your book, Still Breathing, is absolutely a gift to all of us. Thank you for being on the show today.
Oh my gosh. Thank you, Alisha. You're the best.